How to abandon greed, hatred, and delusion. This topic is very, very vital. First, I'd like to draw your attention to two Dhammapada verse to highlight how important this abandoning greed, hatred, and delusion is all about. It comes from the twin verses, the last of the two twin verses, verse number 19, where the Buddha spoke about two monks who were who grew up together, two brotherly monks. One is a young monk, the other one is an elderly monk. So the young monk became a teacher, and he started to teach the teachings of the Buddha, and he was very knowledgeable about every sutra and all the Nikayas and everything. He fully knew how to teach. But he never really put it into practice. And the Buddha used verse number 19 to refer to this young monk who was so excellent at studying and learning and teaching the Dharma that he never put it into practice. So he said, much though he recites the sacred text, but acts not accordingly, that heedless man is like a cowherd who only counts the cows of others. He does not partake of the blessings of the holy life. This is an excellent translation by Acharya Buddharakkhita. I like Buddharakkhita's translations of Dhammapada. They are very down to earth and practical. Here, what the Buddha was trying to point out is that this young monk learned and studied and recited everything very well, but never really put it into practice. And he called such a person heedless. Then he says, this person is like a cowherd tending to other people's cows. That means all he's doing is earning the wages of being a cowherd. He doesn't own the cow, so he doesn't benefit from owning the cows. In the same way, he doesn't benefit from the blessings of the holy life. Then this young monk has a very good childhood friend who was the elderly monk, and who was, because of his age, he did not find he was able to study and remember verses very well. So he decided to go into practice. And verse number 20, the Buddha was referring to this monk who put it into practice. He says, little though he recites the sacred texts, but puts the teaching into practice, forsaking greed, hatred, and delusion, with true wisdom and emancipated mind, clinging to nothing of this or any other world, he indeed partakes of the blessings of a holy life. So as you can see very clearly here, the Buddha was referring to this elderly monk who put everything into practice. And here, this is the clue. The greed, the hatred, and delusion is really the very first thing we got to learn to abandon in our practices. That's why I pointed out to this verse that in order to really put the Dharma into practice, one of the most important things that you really have to do in the beginning is to learn to abandon. Forsaking is abandoning, giving up, relinquishing, abandoning greed, hatred, and delusion. So it's only by doing that that you can gain this true wisdom, panya, and then have this emancipated mind freeing you from all suffering, vimutti. And then only you are able to enter into and partake in the blessings of this holy life. So knowledge without cultivation is of no worth. That is what the Buddha was really pointing out in these two verses that we got to put into practice. When he referred to the elder monk, he says, this elder monk is like the owner of the cows. He benefits from it by gaining the producers of the cow, the milk and the calves, that the offsprings of the cow. So this cowherd, because he practiced, he actually benefits like the owner of the cows, not like just a worker getting wages. So this benefit is really the blessings of the holy life. And in order to do that, you got to have this realization, and this realization comes only from practice, not just studying. It is important to study and understand what the Dharma is all about, what the Buddha was trying to teach. But it is useless to just understanding it without cultivating it. So cultivation is very important. And Bhante Punaji, I'm very thankful to him who has taught me such great wisdom here. He says, a lot of people talk about, looking for the truth. Religions are seeking the truth, but that is not really what it's all about. Bhante Punaji pointed out, he says, the purpose of human thinking is not to discover this thing called truth, but to solve problems. And here the Buddha actually taught us how to solve the biggest problem of all, the problem of suffering, the problem of dukkha. And that is really what the Four Noble Truths is all about. So today we're going to also look at the Four Noble Truths, and we're going to take a look at some of the important verses that the Buddha shared. Before we do that, I would like to share with you a very important video of Bhante Punaji, where he spoke about how we can rise above our animal instincts. You see, we are just like any animal. We are endowed with the all kinds of tools that the animals have. We have our hands, our eyes, our ears. So as far as these things physically, we are no different from any animal. But we have a mind, ability to think. We can rise above, transcending these animal instincts.
And there is a sloka that says, which is very useful to learn if you like to learn that. Ahara nidra bhaya maitunancha samanya metat pasubik samanah dharmohitesa madiko viseso dharmena hinah pasubik samanah. That is Sanskrit. That is a Sanskrit word. Ahara means taking food, eating or drinking, taking food. Ahara. Nidra means sleeping. Bhaya means fear. Maituna means sexual activities. Now, these are things that human beings have in common with animals. So that is the chitta. Taking food, sleeping, fear, and sexual activities. These are things that human beings have in common with animals. That is the animal part of the human being. Then that sloka says, Ahar nidra bhaya maitunancha samanya metat pasubik samanah. Pasubik means the animal. Samanak means common with animals. Dharmohitesa madiko viseso. What is special about the human being is dharma. Dharma simply means the ability to think and reason out, to know what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong, what is true, what is false. That is what is special about the human being. Dharmayana hina pasubik samana. If someone is low in that ability to think and reason out, he is almost an animal. That is what it means. So the purpose of the Buddha was to teach people how to overcome this animal part and develop that human part, properly. It is only then that you become fully human. To get rid of that animal part and cultivate the human part. That is the meaning of becoming a Buddha. That is the meaning of becoming an Arahant. Now, you may have heard that to become an Arahant is to get rid of three things: Lobha, Dosa and Moha. Lobha is what I call lust. Lobha is lust. Dosa is hate, hatred. The lust, hate, and moha is the delusion of self. All selfishness comes from this delusion of self. Self is a delusion. So it is to get rid of lust, hate and delusion. That is what the Buddha taught. That is to transcend the animal nature and become fully human.
Bhante pointed out very clearly, lust, hatred, and greed, and delusion, these are the instincts. These are really animal instincts we got to learn to rise above. So in this sloka, it is very clearly stated that just like all animals, human beings take food, they sleep, they avoid dangers, and engage in sexual activities in order to propagate the species. And these are all common between humans and animals. But it is this ability to think. We are endowed with the mind which is able to learn and then think and make decisions and realize right from wrong, good from bad. It is this ability to think that makes humans different from animals. If we don't make use of this thinking, then we are just like animals, engaging in these animal instincts of lust and greed, anger and hatred, and the delusion of selfishness. Right? So we got to rise above that. So let's look at the important lesson taught by the Buddha, the Four Noble Truths. The purpose of human thinking is not to discover truth, but to solve problems. In the earlier example, in verse 19, the Buddha spoke about this young monk who was able to explain and recite all the sacred texts. It's no point going around telling people this is the truth, and so on. It makes no sense. It doesn't help anyone. What is important is to actually put it into practice and solve the problem of suffering, the problem of dukkha, by abandoning our greed, hatred, and delusion.
The purpose of human thinking is not to discover truth, but to solve problems. And if a person suggests a solution to a problem, it can be tested. And if the problem is solved, it can be called the truth. And that is the only kind of truth which is a solution to a problem. So when the Buddha spoke of the Four Noble Truths, they are really a solution to a problem. So we can only talk about solution to problems and not about real absolute truths. There are no real absolute truths in the world. We are only talking about a solution to a problem, and a solution can always be tested. And if it works, it can be called a truth. This is how the Buddha spoke about truth.
Yeah, so it's very important that we study the Dharma and put it into practice to solve the problem. No point going around declaring the Dharma is the truth. That is useless. So the Four Noble Truths is really not just about truth. Although it is called the Four Noble Truths, it's really about solving the problem. And as Bhante Punnaji pointed out, if it can be tested, and if it solves the problem, then you can call it the truth. So in other words, that's why it's called the Four Noble Truths. Not because we have to go around declaring this is the truth, but because the Four Noble Truths leads us to solve this problem of suffering, the problem of dukkha. Then that's why it can be called a truth, because it's the solution to the problem of dukkha. So let's take a look at these Four Noble Truths. What are the Four Noble Truths? The first is talking about dukkha, that there is dukkha. And of course, the common translation, we are all experiencing all kinds of suffering. So when we go into the Four Noble Truths in detail, we're going to be able to see what all this means. The second is samudaya. This really means that there is an origin of dukkha. There are reasons how dukkha arises, and we're going to take a look at that. Greed, hatred, and delusion are the real reasons that lead us to all kinds of dukkha. So we're going to take a look at the Noble Truth number 2 on that. And of course, that leads us to practicing it, and therefore we are able to abandon greed, hatred, and delusion, leading to freedom from suffering. We can bring suffering to an end, nirodha. Nirodha simply means the cessation and extermination of all suffering. And that can be brought to an end. And when that happens, you are basically at the doorstep of Nibbana. You're now going to experience the highest and most supreme bliss of Nibbana. And of course, the Buddha went on to explain that the way to do that, the magga, the way leading to the cessation of all suffering, is really this Eightfold Way, which we'll just take a very quick look at it. So today we're going to focus very much on these abandoning greed, hatred, and delusion. So let's take a look at the first Noble Truth, where the Buddha pointed out that we are all experiencing dukkha. So why is that? And the Buddha pointed out that there are 8 conditions of dukkha every single one of us experience. The first 4 is universal to animals and to humans. That is birth, aging, sickness, and death. These are the first 4 conditions of suffering that every living thing in the entire universe will experience. And then we also experience separation from what is pleasing. What does that mean? That simply means that when we enjoy, when we experience something that is pleasurable, we enjoy it and we find that, oh, I like this is wonderful. But sooner or later, it comes to an end. Nothing stays forever. Life is anicca. Things can come to an end. So when we lose what is pleasurable, we suffer. We feel the pain of losing. Like, for example, one of the greatest things we can lose are our own dearly beloved relatives, our parents, our children, our brothers and sisters. So when we lose them, we feel the pain in us. So separation from what is pleasing is dukkha. And the next is union with what is displeasing is dukkha. And that is when we experience something that is unpleasant, that harms us, hurt us, it is suffering. And we encounter that all the time. In the past couple of years, all of us have encountered the coronavirus pandemic. And we were all under lockdown. So that was not happy, not pleasurable, and displeasing. Did you enjoy that? Or was it suffering? You see? So to be stuck with something unpleasant, that is suffering. And of course, then the Buddha went on to say that we all have desires and wishes and dreams that we want fulfilled. But if we don't get it, it is suffering. Not every dream we have can come true. Not every desire we have, we can get. So not getting what we want, that is suffering. Many people want something like, for example, if you work for an employer, you want First, you want good salary, you want good bonus. At the end of the year, you hope the boss will give you an extra bonus. What if he doesn't give to you? Then that is painful. And if he gives more to your colleague, the person who you help, he gets more than you, and then that is suffering because you're not getting what you want. You don't get the promotion. That is all suffering. But number 8, the mother of all suffering is this 5 aggregates you are all experiencing. 5 aggregates refers to the process by which our physical senses is able to experience the environment. Ability to see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, right? So the process of seeing, the process of hearing, the process of smelling, the process of touching, the process of tasting, these processes, the Buddha explained very clearly as the 5 aggregates. How it arises by contacting with the environment, and then we experience it, and the mind begins to project a perception of what we have experienced. But what the Buddha warned us here is, it is not the fact that we're experiencing it. It is the fact that we are clinging on to this experience. Upadana. We hang on. We experience something and we want it all the time. For example, if you see something beautiful, or a young person, a young lady looks into the mirror and see her skin very smooth and beautiful and say, "Oh, I like my look in the mirror," and puts up all this makeup and say, "Oh, I look so beautiful." But over the years, you will realize that you will age. No amount of makeup can make you look beautiful like before, as you age. So if we cling on to what we see, we cling on to what we hear, happy sounds, we cling on to what we smell, taste, and touch, all that will lead to suffering. So we have to learn how to let go this clinging, because it is this clinging that leads to our delusion of the self-centered existence, right? And it is the greed for pleasures, it is the hatred for displeasures, and it is this clinging to the delusion of self-centered existence that is causing us so much suffering. And that is what the Buddha explained, right, very clearly. So number 8, the 5 aggregates, all that we experience in the environment, what we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. If we cling on to those experiences, it leads to suffering. And this first noble truth has to be understood. The Buddha stated very clearly, it has to be understood. And then the second noble truth, the Buddha pointed out then the origin of dukkha, samudaya. And basically he stated that it is this tanha. The Pali word used is tanha, often translated as craving. It is this craving which leads to renewed existence. Renewed existence means our desire to continue to want to live and enjoy, accompanied by delight and lust. That means if we find something pleasurable, we want it, we're delightful for it, we lust for it. If we find something unpleasant, we do that. Remember, whenever you experience something unpleasant, you want to look for something more pleasant to overcome that. So we're always seeking this delight and lust here and there. So the Buddha pointed out it is this tanha which leads to our concept of self, this delusion of existence. Now, Bhante Punnaji, one of the wonderful things I learned from Bhante Punnaji, because of his background, his impeccable use of English, and his very deep knowledge and understanding of the Pali words and the Pali Kenyan, he actually pointed out the word tanha more accurately or more precisely means emotional reactions. That means whatever we experience, remember I pointed out about clinging on to the 5 aggregates, everything that we experience, we react to it, and that is tanha, the reaction to every experience, the reaction to every experience, that is tanha. And the Buddha pointed out there are 3 types of reaction. Tanha for sensual pleasures. That means when we experience something pleasant, right, and this is kama tanha, then we react to it, the emotional reaction towards pleasant experiences. It leads to the condition called lobha. Lobha basically refers to the lust and the greed for pleasures. So the first type of tanha is kama tanha, which is our emotional reaction to pleasant sensations, pleasant experiences. And this leads to the condition of lobha, our lust and greed. Now, it's very important. It starts with lust. That means we want it. It leads to greed. That means we can never have enough. See, lust turns into greed. Lust is something you wish for, you desire, you want it, and you're getting it. But we never have enough. Whatever we get, we want more, right? We're always seeking for more. So lust turns into greed. The second type of tanha is tanha for non-existence, vibhava tanha. This is our emotional reaction to unpleasant experiences, unpleasant sensations, things that are not pleasant or something that is hurting us, harming us, something we don't want. That's why we don't want it to exist. Vibhava, we don't want it to exist. Vibhava tanha means our reaction is to get rid of it. And this leads to the condition called dosa, the aversion and hatred towards these pleasures. We begin with aversion. Aversion means avoiding it. We want to stay away from what is unpleasant. But even if we stay away from it, it keeps coming at us. Could you stay away from coronavirus during the time of the pandemic? Were you able to be completely away from all the lockdown and all that? You can't. You were stuck with the lockdown. So aversion, if we are not satisfied, in other words, we try to avoid something and we can't get rid of it. It keeps coming to us, like what happened during the pandemic lockdown. Then it turns to hatred. So many people were so hateful for what they had to experience through the lockdown. And in the Western world, they were all making all kinds of comments about the Wuhan virus and all that, So this aversion turns into hatred. And that is dosa from vibhava tanha. And the third kind of tanha is the tanha for continued existence. And this is bhava tanha. Bhava tanha is basically our emotional reaction to existence. Oh, I exist. I can experience the world. I live in this world. I, me, or mine. So this leads to a condition called moha, this delusion of self-centered existence. I exist. That first word, I, is so strong. The I, me, or mine. That is moha, the delusion of self-centered existence, arising from not knowing what is the realities of life, from ignorance, right? So arising from avijja, the ignorance of not knowing what arises, what is the reality of life, that it is anicca, dukkha, and anatta. So these are the three unwholesome roots, right? And these are really our emotional reaction to everything we experience, be it pleasant, be it unpleasant, or be it the recognition of this existence of self. So these are the three unwholesome roots that we have to learn to abandon. And this is actually mentioned clearly in the sutra, actually, where the Buddha spoke about the Four Noble Truths, that the second noble truth is something that we have to abandon tanha, abandoning our emotional reaction to everything we experience. So these are the three unwholesome roots: kama tanha, vibhava tanha, and bhava tanha. So we're going to learn to let go, relinquish, abandon. That can lead us to the third noble truth, and that is the freedom from all suffering. Okay. So let's re-examine this verse 20. And I also learned a very important lesson from Bhante Punanji. We don't just look at what people translated from Pali Kenyan, because if we just look at purely translations alone, we don't learn very much. We also have to examine, with the help of a teacher, to examine the Pali terms involved. So in this case, here the Buddha pointed out about greed, hatred, and delusion. And you can see very clearly the three Pali words mentioned there are raga, dosa, and moha. Now, without going into deep theoretical explanation or technical explanation, the word raga is often used interchangeably with lobha in the sense that from a practical sense, that means in terms of the practical aspect of it, raga is the same as lobha in the sense that it is our desire for pleasurable experiences, our lust and greed for pleasures. So raga and lobha are basically the same thing. When you see the word raga appearing in any Pali text, you can recognize that as some kind of lust or greed for pleasant experiences. But what is more important is that if we were to learn how to abandon them, forsaking them, it leads us to true wisdom. And what is true wisdom? It is this term here. Sampajano is basically, Samapajano is really referring to this Pali term, sampajana, which is the ability to discern, our attention, our clear comprehension of the realities of life, and our ability to discern. Discerning attention means whatever we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, we are able to see what is good from bad, what is right from wrong. So we are able to separate one from the other. Right? Not just enjoy every experience, but able to see what is helpful, what is harmful. And then able to look within. And this is this satipatthana, the ability to look within. Systematic introspection to see within us how it affects us internally. This is wisdom. You will then be able to realize anicca, dukkha, and anatta, that everything is transient. Everything is changing, that it leads to suffering if you cling on to it, and that there is really no enduring self behind all that. Anicca, dukkha, anatta. But the next thing we have to look at is this emancipated mind. Here, it is referring to being freed from emotions. Chitto is referring to our emotional part of the mind. So being freed from our emotions. One who has freed himself from clinging and grasping attains total emotional freedom. And this is mentioned in the Third Noble Truth, where this total emotional freedom is really the emancipation, the rising above, transcending beyond our animal instincts. So it is very important to then realize the first order of practice is to learn to abandon greed, hatred, and delusion. And then that's why when we are able to do that, we will arrive at the Third Noble Truth, that there is an ending to all suffering, Nirodha. And the Buddha said it very clearly in straight, simple terms in the sutra itself. It says, it is the remainderless fading away and cessation of that same tanha. Same tanha is referring to that three kinds of tanha. Kama tanha, that is our emotional reaction towards pleasurable experiences. Vibhava tanha, that is our emotional reaction towards unpleasant experiences. We want it to stop. And bhava tanha, our emotional reaction towards the recognition of the self, the selfishness. So it is really the remainderless fading away and cessation of this tanha. And again, tanha is really our emotional reaction, giving up and relinquishing, abandoning, right? All emotional reactions, letting go. And that makes us free from emotional reactions. We no longer depend on emotions for our happiness. And finally, we are no longer dependent on it at all. We can live our life free from that. If you're able to attain that, you would have arrived at the Third Noble Truth. And from there, you can then go on to attain the highest and most supreme bliss of Nibbana. And this has to be realized. This is to be practiced. That we have to practice what has been taught in order to attain this realization. So now let's listen to an explanation by Bhante about these emotions controlling our lives.
So in the human being, the thinking part is called mano. whereas the emotional part is called chitta. But the Buddha pointed out was, what has to be done is not to obey the chitta. What is happening today is that the mano part, the thinking part, is doing what the chitta wants. You see, chitta is dominating the mind. And the mano is just catering to the chitta. There is a verse where the Buddha says, Chittena niyati loko, chittena parikassati, chittassa eka dhammassa, sabbeva vasamangbagu. What that means is, chitta is dominating the world. Chittena niyati loko. Loka is the world. Chittena niyati loko. Chittena parikassati. Chitta is disturbing everything. Chittassa eka dhammassa. Chitta is that one thing. Sabbeva vasamangvagu. That everyone is spellbound by chitta. Everyone is dominated by chitta. Like being spellbound. So therefore, the only thing is to learn how to gain control over the chitta, the emotional part.
So what Bhante did say very clearly is that it is our mano which is doing what the chitta wants. Our thinking is always making decisions according to what the emotion wants. So in other words, our thinking is really being controlled by the emotions. The chitta is dominating the mind. And it is our thinking is always making decisions according to what the chitta wants, making decisions according to how our emotions feel. So, and we are therefore spellbound by our emotional mind. And the solution is to learn how to gain control over this emotional thinking by calming the emotional mind. And one of the first important practice is meditation. It is the meditation that helps us to calm this emotional mind. So Bhante pointed out this verse here, and this came from the Chitta Sutra. Emotions dominate the world. Emotions create distress. Distress is really this mental suffering. Stress is a physical suffering. Your body is experiencing tensions and stress. But your mind is experiencing emotional suffering, and that is distress. So emotion create this mental suffering. And emotion is that one thing to which all are spellbound. We are trapped by our emotional thinking. So we've got to learn how to get out of it. Now, one of the important things I learned from Bhante is to look at the Pali terms precisely. Very often the word chitta is translated as mind. Mind alone doesn't help you understand what it means. If you were to think of chitta, really is talking about the emotional mind, then it makes much more sense. It is the emotions that dominate the world, creating distress, and it is the one thing that we are all trapped by our emotional thinking. And how are we trapped by our emotional thinking? I'm going to show you our animal instincts. So this is actually the part of our brain which is common to some of the higher animals, right? Or the monkeys have it, the dogs have it. So let's take a look at what's inside the brain. It is what's inside the brain that leads us to have these animal instincts. And therefore, there is this part of the brain called the amygdala. And this is a very primitive part of the brain. It is scanning everything that's going on. That means everything you see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. The amygdala is observing it, looking for potential threats or dangers. And the amygdala reacts to it. This reaction releases all kinds of stress hormones in the body. And this leads to the fight or flight reaction. The purpose of this is actually, this is evolved through millions of years of evolution. And the purpose of this is to protect us from harm. When we see dangers, the body get all tensed up, we jump out of the way. For example, you walk down the street and suddenly a car comes charging towards you. So you learn to jump out of the way. In the same way, as we grow up as adults, if somebody were to throw a ball at you, as the ball comes towards you, you learn to block it. Blocking it is to fight it, right? Fighting against it. Or sometimes you duck, and ducking or, avoiding it, that is running away from it. So it's fight or flight reaction. This part of the brain is evolved to protect us from harm. But unfortunately, this part of the brain can also be easily aroused by sensual pleasures and all kinds of other threats that leads us to react emotionally. So this is the part of the brain that arouses emotions of fear, panic, anger, anxiety, disgust, distress, and lust and hatred and greed, right? So it actually creates unnecessary arousal. Amygdala is really also causing us harm. So the amygdala has this paradoxical function. It is both our bodyguard protecting us from dangers, but it is also the terrorist in the brain, right? Arousing with all this greed, hatred, and delusion, causing us to experience all kinds of suffering. So we have to learn how to tame the amygdala, right? So let's take a look at the scientific explanation, scientific examination of the science of this lust and greed. So what the scientists did was they put the subjects, the people, through an MRI machine that is scanning the brain and observing activity inside the brain. And they are shown videos, they're wearing the goggles, they can see a video of firstly a peaceful scene, so it makes them feel relaxed. So that is the baseline. And then they begin to show sexually arousing videos, sexually explicit scenes, arousing their lust. Right? The Buddha has pointed out this sexual arousal is one of the most powerful, lustful arousal we can ever experience. This is why it's very important that the Buddha pointed out that in order to become a monk, we have to learn to give up all kinds of sexual activity. Because sexual arousal is one of the most powerful emotional arousal that leads us to behave in irrational ways. People have done terrible, evil things over sexual arousals. Right? Wives have killed their husband. Men have killed their wives, murdered their wives because they were sexually aroused by another opposite partner, So that's why sexual arousal is so dangerous, right? If we don't learn how to tame it and learn how to live in a peaceful way with these arousals. So let's take a look at an explanation by the scientists on the science behind lust and greed, which leads to lobha.
In Seattle, Washington, scientists are attempting to map the exact neural architecture of human sexuality. Dr. Ken Maravilla investigates how lust and sexuality affect each part of the human brain. He uses two technologies. One is the MRI machine. The other technology is a simple DVD player.
Our subjects are presented a stimulus that consists of sexually explicit scenes that promote their ability to become aroused in the magnet.
The experiment is simple. Subjects are shown neutral videos to get a baseline. Then, images become more sexually explicit for several minutes, while Maravilla and his staff voyeuristically watch as the subjects' brains change.
We have areas in the frontal lobes that are associated with reward and pleasant feelings, and these become active with arousal. The amygdala often becomes activated, and this is one of the decision-making, evaluative areas of the brain.
The MRI shows that as subjects are sexually aroused, there is an intriguing corollary to the new findings.
We've also found that certain areas of the brain seem to become less active, and there appear to be areas that are related to moral judgment, of inhibition, if you will.
When the lust areas of the brain light up, the judgment areas of the brain begin to turn off. The conclusion? The more aroused a person, the less access they have to clear judgment. It would seem that science shows a direct connection between lust and poor judgment.
So it was very clearly pointed out in that experiment that when lust is aroused, judgment is turned off. Judgment is in the thinking brain, right? Lust is in the emotional brain. So when the emotional brain gets excited, it shuts down our thinking brain. So therefore, we got to learn to do it the other way around, to calm down our emotions. Otherwise, when emotions are aroused, our lust is aroused, our judgment, we cannot think anymore, cannot think clearly. The more aroused a person, the less access to clear judgment. So we have to realize that very important fact. And the scientists have proven it. There is no way you can explain that emotions are good for you in that sense, right? So now let's look at the other aspect of it. We have seen lobha. Now let's take a look at dosa, the signs of anger and hatred.
Today, scientists are beginning to examine exactly where anger comes from.
The brain perceives a lot of information, both from the outside world and from inside the body. And there is one part of the brain called the amygdala that serves the function of sifting through all that information and asking one question. Is this a threat? Is this something I should worry about?
Dr. Ruben Gur has zeroed in on the amygdala as the key instigator of anger. This walnut-sized lobe can quickly overwhelm the brain with uncontrollable rage.
Once there is a perception of danger, there is a cascade of responses in the body that includes changes in heart rate, in blood pressure, in sweating. It makes your body ready to fight or flee.
The amygdala is a primitive part of the brain. It exists because the human brain is made up of layers that were added on top of each other over the millions of years of evolution.
All those other older brains are still alive and well inside your own brain. So you have a part of you that thinks like a dog, and you have a part of you that thinks like a crocodile, and a part of you that thinks like a monkey.
The amygdala creates an automatic fight or flight response to threats. But human beings have evolved another part of the brain, the frontal lobes.
This area that you can see here in the front is the orbital frontal region. And the orbital frontal regions are like brakes for the amygdala. If you can think of the amygdala as being the engine for the threat response, the orbital frontal is the brakes.
If Dr. Gur is correct, then a person who is overwhelmed by anger is literally temporarily insane until his amygdala can be controlled.
So a person overwhelmed by anger is temporarily insane, okay? And this is what is happening here. The amygdala reacts to perceived threats and create this chain reaction. And in our brain, there is a part that behaves like a dog, a part that behaves like a crocodile, a part that behaves like a monkey. These are our animal instincts. Greed, anger, hatred arising. And basically, the amygdala is like the engine for threat reaction. It's like the engine that is running the car that's trying to go very fast. And our thinking brain, the frontal lobe, this is our thinking brain. Therefore, this is our thinking brain are the brakes. If the amygdala is like a car that is going too fast, the brakes cannot stop the car. The brakes alone cannot stop the car. So you got to slow down the amygdala, slow down this engine so that you can now put the brakes on and stop the car, stop the engine. Okay. When overwhelmed by anger or hatred, we are literally temporarily insane until this amygdala can be calmed down. And you read a lot of stories today in America. Almost every month or every week, in fact, you hear of some school shooting. Someone takes a gun, goes to a school, goes to a music hall, goes to a club, goes to some place, public place, and starts shooting at people, killing people, because they have become temporarily insane. They are overwhelmed with anger and hatred towards maybe their bosses, towards their co-workers, towards people of another race, people of another religion. And this is really what is happening there. Right? So there is the thinking brain that can behave like the brakes to all this, the engine of hatred. And it is made of 4 different lobes: the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe over the top, the temporal lobe on the side, and the occipital lobe on the back. But it is this frontal lobe that has all these functions that is able to help us, our attention system, to be able to pay attention, remembering good things from bad, our ability to think critically, and so on. But it is really the very bottom 2, the last 2, decision making, goal setting, planning, judgment, reasoning, rationalizing, that can help us learn how to overcome our emotions. And all these functions are happening in this prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the lower part of the frontal lobe, right behind the eyebrow. We got to learn how to strengthen it. And one of the powerful techniques to learn to strengthen this prefrontal cortex is meditation. It is by practicing meditation that you can strengthen this part of your brain, your thinking brain, able to make good decisions, deciding to practice, deciding what is to go for doing good instead of doing harm. Goal setting, setting a goal for yourself to learn the Dhamma, to practice the Dhamma, planning how you can practice it, when you can actually do certain projects to put Dhamma into practice, be able to judge what is right from wrong, reason out the cause and effect behind things that are happening, and rationalizing your resources to be able to do the right things at the right time. That is all prefrontal cortex. And the way to train that is meditation. And the Buddha mentioned that very clearly in the verse number 20 of Dhammapada, right? That it is putting it into practice. And if you read the story of the 2 monks, then it is really putting into practice of meditation that the elderly monk had become enlightened. Right? If not, we will behave just like animals. We're going to learn to think, to apply, make good use of our thinking. No good just declaring Dhamma is the truth, but putting it into practice and solving the problem of the suffering. And now we listen to Bhante Punaji explain how we can tame the emotions.
message goes to the amygdala and the emotion is aroused, and the other message goes to the brain where the thinking goes on, and then you begin to change the way. And now they are talking about this, so it's very important to understand that the Buddha has gone even beyond this, and if we see the first verse in the Dhammapada, there in the first verse in the Dhammapada, what you get is Mano Pubbangama Dhamma, which is wrongly translated today. There, Mano means that thinking part. I told you there are two things, the thinking part and the emotional part, which is called Chitta. Mano Pubbangama means the thinking part comes first, before the emotional part. So it is by changing the thinking part, which is what is called the cognitive part, that the affective can be controlled. So it is the thinking part that is able to control. And that is the real secret discovered in the modern world by the cognitive psychologists. They are using that in what is called cognitive psychotherapy. They are using that principle, but still they are not able to fully control the emotions because they don't know about meditation. And but the Buddha used this method.
Bhante Punnaji pointed out that the Buddha used the method of meditation. So here, it's very important. This is also one of the wonderful things I learned from Bhante, that to be able to discern the words where the Buddha used mano and when the Buddha used chitta, what do they really mean? When the Buddha used the word mano, he was referring to the thinking process, the cognitive process. When the Buddha used the word chitta, he was referring to the emotional process. And the thinking part comes before the emotional part. And this is clearly mentioned in the first verse of the Dhammapada, Mano Pubbangama Dhamma. And by changing our thinking, we can control the emotions, the way we interpret our circumstances. That is our thinking. And then by interpreting circumstances properly, peacefully, then we can overcome the emotions. For example, if somebody were to say something insulting to me, let's say he looks at me and says, "Wow, Billy, you look so fat." And I'm thinking, oh, he's insulting me. If I'm thinking that he's insulting me, I get angry, you see. But if I were to change the way I'm thinking, I'm saying that he is not insulting me. He's just pointing out a fact that I am fat, that I have to be careful of my health. I have to take care of my health. Don't overeat and things like that. So if I'm thinking like that, then I feel okay. I say, oh, he's helping me. And when he calls me fat, I should say, thank you very much, right? Because I'm changing the way I'm interpreting what he has done. He's not insulting me. He's just reminding me something very important in my life. So it's changing the way we think. Right? So this cognitive psychotherapy, these psychologists of modern day, they have discovered it. They aim to control our emotions by changing the way we interpret our circumstances, but they did not realize that there is this thing called meditation. And that's what the Buddha did. The Buddha taught meditation as the method to tame our emotional mind. And meditation is often called bhavana. And Bhante Punnaji has stated it very clearly. It is by being conscious. Bhavana is really training the mind to be conscious. Here, when Bhante said conscious, he's talking about the thinking brain, our prefrontal cortex, the ability to discern right from wrong, the ability to judge good from bad, and so on. This is consciousness. Non-consciousness is behaving with animal instincts. Consciousness is behaving with this clear thinking. And it is by doing that we can control our emotions. And bhavana, the practice of meditation, is how we can help to train this thinking mind. And that leads us to the fourth noble truth. I won't go into any discussion. It's due to limited time. But basically, the Buddha pointed out that the way leading to the cessation of suffering is to understand and to practice the Four Noble Truths. That's why the Buddha said this is to be cultivated, to be practiced, not just declaring it is the truth, but actually to practice it. The Eightfold Way is something you have to understand and put into practice. No point just understanding and able to recite it. That's useless. You have to put it into practice. And one of the key practice we spoke about all this while is about meditation. So it's very important that if you get a chance, always learn meditation. Even if you learn, go to a good teacher, go to any good teacher, trained and skillful to teach you. Even if you are just a beginner, the first time you sit down and try to meditate, you will experience important benefits. By simply sitting down and meditating, slowing down your mind, you will slow down your heart rate. And that improves your blood circulation, right? And it lowers your blood pressure. And that can help enhance your immune system. And it can help you calm your anger, fear, and anxiety. These are very erratic emotional uprising. And relieving your negative moods, you can start to feel a little bit more positive. But if you were to follow a good teacher, and the good teacher teaches you techniques that can help you improve your meditation practice, you begin to experience much more benefits. You will be able to tame your greed, hatred, delusion better. And then you can also learn to abandon the 5 hindrances. Right? The 5 hindrances are more than just greed, hatred, and delusion. Basically, if you learn to abandon the 5 hindrances, your mind begins to become so stilled, it starts to enter into a state of jhana. And then you begin to experience the first jhana. And in there, you begin to cultivate this introspective attention, systematic introspection. This is satipatthana, to be able to cultivate this satipatthana. And then you begin to develop this cognitive consonance. The mind no longer responds to any kind of emotions. It is now still and it is now working properly. And finally, you will be able to experience and understand what is going on, investigating cognitive experiences, investigating what's going on in your mind. This is Satta Bojjhanga. And finally, you will be able to attain insight into the realities, anicca, dukkha, anatta. With that, you would have then gained the higher wisdom, panya, full comprehension and insight into the realities of life, anicca, dukkha, anatta, and that leads you to freedom from suffering. You are now at the doorstep of attaining arahantship. Right? You are at the doorstep of full liberation, emancipation, deliverance. And with that slide, I end my presentation. I hope this has been helpful. I would like to share with you the link you can use to download the slides. I give a shortcut link so you can actually download the slides of this sharing. And from there, you will also get these links, which are Bhante Punnaji's meditation guides, level 1, level 2, level 3. You can download them. And if you have any questions about these books, these slides, feel free to send me an email or connect with me through Facebook. And with that, I end my sharing. Thank you very much. Thank you, Bhante. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Brother Billy, for this wonderful presentation on how to abandon greed, hatred, and delusion.